Thank you for this kind introduction. I will try, I won't. No? Okay, I will. The title of my talk is a rather broad subject, but I will concentrate specifically on Ukraine, where the ongoing Russian invasion has severely endangered religious heritage. According to the Institute for Religious Freedom, as of January 2023, at least 494 religious buildings, theological institutions, and sacred places were wholly destroyed, damaged, or looted by the Russian military. As of September 4, 2024, UNESCO has verified damage to 438 cultural sites, of which only 142 are identified as religious sites. The numbers may vary, but the images terrify. This photograph documents the Transfiguration Church in Odessa. On July 22, 2023, it was struck by a rocket during the shelling of the city's historical center, which is included into UNESCO World Heritage List. The church was originally built by Russian imperial authorities in the early 19th century, then destroyed in 1930s by the Soviets during the anti-religious campaign, and eventually it was rebuilt from new materials during Ukraine independence because of the government program that reconstructed church buildings around the country. Now history seems to repeating itself. Russian forces shell Ukraine indiscriminately because Putin's war pursues not merely a colonial agenda of establishing hegemony over a neighboring country, but a genocidal goal of the final solution to the Ukrainian question. In these talks, however, I won't meditate on the grim reality of destruction anymore. Instead, I will not focus on the loss of the religious heritage, but I will focus on efforts to save and preserve it. Drawing on an anthropological perspective, I approach these efforts as a social process, entangled with challenges of which Ukrainian society faces right now, caught in the crossfire of external military aggression and internal crisis. Thinking of this broader context leads me to the following research question. How have the preservation practices for religious heritage in Ukraine, normally implemented during peaceful times, been impacted by the overwhelming conditions of the war? I hope this line of inquiry will help us better understand where efforts should be directed to achieve the most effective results in preserving religious heritage, both during crises like this one and in recovering periods that follow. In short, I will argue that parties and individuals involved in preserving religious heritage in Ukraine have developed what can be termed as anti-fragile response to the challenges of war. I borrow the concept of anti-fragile from the economist and philosopher Nassim Nicolas Taleb, who describes it as the ability not just to withstand the stress, which is associated with resilience, but to grow stronger as a result of the stress. In other words, I posit that in Ukraine during wartime, religious heritage preservation has achieved increased efficiency rather than merely maintained the pre-war levels. I reached this conclusion through in-depth interviews with colleagues who are leading preservation efforts on the ground in multiple capacities, ranging from independent experts and activists to those who hold offices in the government. Their firsthand experience and insight have enriched my analysis with personal perspectives, often overlooked in large-scale social science research. Instead of relying on impersonal statistics, I aim to bring a human face to the preservation of religious heritage in Ukraine, focusing on the individuals and their stories. Namely, I will discuss 3 specific cases that highlight these personal perspectives. First is the activist response in my city of Lviv, which is the most westward Ukraine's big centers, in the early days of the Russian full-scale invasion. Second, I will discuss the ongoing restoration of the 18th century church in the village of Isaia in the Carpathians. And third, I will discuss the digitalization of religious art at the Kyiv-Pecherska Lavra Reserve, which is located at the site of the oldest and largest Orthodox monasteries in Ukraine. Right after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine began on February 24, 2022, the religious building and monument located in Lviv underwent a dramatic and uncanny transformation. The windows of the churches were covered with shields. In some cases, such as on this one Orthodox Church of the Dormition of the Virgin on Ruska Street, built in the 17th century, the shields were made of plywood. In other, at the Roman Catholic Basilica of the Assumption of the Virgin, or Latin Cathedral at the Rynok Square, built between 14th and 18th century, the shields were cut from tin. Freestanding statues, such as this one sculpture of the Virgin Mary on the Prospect Svobody, which was removed during the Soviet occupation and reinstalled in recent years of Ukrainian independence, were reinforced with metal scaffolding. And in museums, such as Andrei Sheptytsky National Museum in Lviv, the staff removed precious icons and other religious objects from the exhibition halls to storage facilities behind the massive walls and away from windows. The city was preparing for the siege. Populating numerous articles across the internet, these images might have been interpreted as evidence of a strong, resilient response from Ukraine's state system of cultural heritage preservation to the unexpected calamities of war. A response which was run according to a well-calculated master plan prepared ahead of the events. Factually, however, this impression did not align with reality. As I spoke with colleagues involved in the preserving cultural heritage, it became clear that the system had failed. The initiatives in Lviv were actually initiated by someone with no official role in the state's heritage preservation hierarchy, and by her job description, these efforts were not her direct responsibility. On February 26, 2022, on the Saturday of Souls, a day when Orthodox Christians commemorate the dead, Irina Horbany, a senior researcher at the Museum Department of the Ethnology Institute, attended a morning service at the Dormition Church on Ruska Street in Lviv. Horbany's body was on site in the church, but the thoughts were off-site, on the front line, where the battle was taking place. 48 hours into Russia's full-scale invasion, no one could predict for how long Ukraine would survive. Horbany's side wandered around the church, semi-dark interior, until she locked it on a window decorated with the Virgin Oran's image. The sun shone in Horbany's eyes, and as she told me in the interview, her inner voice spoke, the stained glass. Designed by Petro Holodny the Younger, a Ukrainian artist of Byzantine modernism, the stained glass has adorned the church since 1928. Now it could be destroyed by a single blast. Horbany realized that her task is to save it. After the service, she asked to discuss a plan with local cultural heritage activists and authorities. I quote, "I understand the military efforts and human life are the top priority right now, but we have to save the monuments too. The people who lived before us preserved them for us, and we need to preserve them for the generations to come." End quote. Armed with this irrefutable argument, Horbany secured manpower and resources, enabling her to begin covering church windows with protective shields. Like a stone drop in a lake sending out waves, her action spurred cultural heritage activists to self-organize around the local society for monuments protection, led by Andriy Saluk. Every day people gathered in their office at Copernic Street to discuss the most urgent needs, to negotiate with authorities, businesses, and to plan activities on the ground. Besides protecting churches and statues in the city, distributing fire protection tools and materials around the region, they also involved in summarizing the experience on the move. As an example of this, let me briefly describe a document which the experts, activists addressed to rural church communities, providing them with a roadmap of necessary steps to prevent the heritage loss. The initial draft of this emergency manual was written in the bomb shelter by restorers Oleg Rishnyak and Oksana Sadova, where they were spending some time during one of the endless air alarms at the initial stage of war. They shared the draft with the colleagues and after discussion and corrections, sent it out to the priests and communities in the region for whom they have restored wall paintings and icons in the past. Their colleagues did the same, making sure that all religious communities in distant location, isolated location, will have a clear plan of action in case of worst scenario of war. The manual is a succinct 4-page document that opened with a detailed explanation of how to produce photographic documentation of the church and all valuable artifacts that it owns. Secondly, the manual outlines specific fire protection measures such as preparing fire-resistant fabric to cover icons and iconostasis and deploying dry powder fire extinguishers in accessible location. The third point recommends organizing round-the-clock surveillance to deter looting and vandalism. Fourth, discuss what to do when the front line approaches the church. In particular, the authors recommend removing every item from the building that can be removed and writing down what exactly and to whom it was transferred for safekeeping and evacuation. And the concluding section emphasizes the importance of communication with local authorities, the military, and the preservation experts. The document sets out for the absence of the bureaucratic jargon and empty words often encountered in documents concerning art preservation in conflict areas. Instead, it offers advice that are both practical and usable, effectively addressing a gap that previously existed in the system of heritage preservation, both on the state and the church level. In their struggle at this initial day, the Ukrainians were not left alone. Just as the ordinary European Union citizens opened their homes to refugees, Europe's cultural institution, active and individual experts actively engaged in supporting activities in Ukraine. Of course, the international cooperation was taking place before the war, but now it reached completely new level. The international support was overwhelming and diverse. It included protective materials and equipment, and also offering expertise and training accompanied by the endless string of online meetings and conferences. And I'd like to take this opportunity to especially thank our Polish colleagues, particularly those here in Krakow, who played a significant role in these efforts. All the efforts of activists at the start of the invasion eventually triggered significant change in how cultural heritage agency began to function, driving the latter to operate far more effectively than before the war. Although these agencies initially suffered paralysis in the chaos of early days, by the summer of 2022, after the Russian blitzkrieg failed, restoration programs not only resumed, but were improved. Prior to the invasion, local politicians, aiming to secure their electoral victories, influenced the distribution of state funding for restoration. This was a competitive process that resulted to a thin spread of funds across the region. And while restorations were begun on multiple churches, few reached the necessary level of completion. With the beginning of war, the influence of local politicians has ceased, and authorities began to distribute scarce resources in a more focused manner. They assigned funds specifically to monuments under immediate threat and provide full financial support necessary to preserve the church. Currently, restoration efforts in the Lviv region operate under a comprehensive program planned until the end of 2025. Funded exclusively with the money of Ukrainian taxpayers, it has a manageable and clear objective: to restore 6 wooden churches which are right now in critical condition. One of these churches which I will discuss is St. Michael Church, located in the village of Isaye in the Turka district in the Carpathians. This is a 3-part, 3-dome structure of the so-called Boyko architectural type, spread on the northern slope of the Carpathian Mountains across Polish-Ukrainian border. According to the inscription on the door frame, architect Ilya Pantelimon built the church in 1663. Based on this date, the church should be deemed as one of the oldest extant wooden churches in the Lviv region and throughout Ukraine as well. The wall painting inside the church, which offer a naive reinterpretation of late Baroque aesthetics and iconography by the local artists, are dated back to the late 18th century, with no more precise dating possible due to the lack of inscriptions or references in written sources. The building remained a functional temple until quite recently. It survived Soviet atheist campaign, but in 2003, the local community decided that a nearby stone church built in 1930s would suffice for their needs and permanently close the wooden church. The building disuse eventually led to its gradual decline. As experts began to alarm, the authorities initiated restoration of the church in 2018, but these efforts were hampered by funding issues, creating a very real risk of losing the building and its wall painting completely. The restoration was resumed last year, on the 2nd year of the war, and continues today. The restorers elevated the church, replaced the lower level beams, and reinforced its foundation. They also fully renewed the wooden cladding of the walls and roofs, strengthened the walls, and installed a new floor. This year, in spring, an experienced team under the director Oleg Ryszak began to restore the church murals, which by that time were barely visible beneath the layer of dirt. As Ryszak explained me in the interview, they had to wait for the architectural restoration to progress, since it is impossible to restore painting when the church is leaking. On the other hand, given that the church had been exposed to moisture for so long, it was crucial to start the work while the building was still drying, rather than waiting for it complete dry out. The reason is that in the process of drying, wood shrinks and contracts, but the ground layer beneath the painting preserves its volume. Thus, if restorers would wait too long, the painting will begin to fall off the walls. The restoration took place in several stages. First, they cleaned from the contaminants and stabilized the original layer of paint, and then toned the losses of pigment to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the work, but restrained from reconstruction the missing elements. Today, the late 18th century wall paintings are coming back to life in their original color. What once was postponed due to the disorganization and corruption of the system now has been achieved with the improvements, even though they took place in much more challenging conditions. When I asked my interviewees where they felt a sense of futility of their restoration efforts amid the war, especially given all this destruction of religious heritage which takes place in the East, Oksana Sadova, a leading member of the team, answered confidently, "We don't have a choice. Everyone should do their job at their place. We know that what we are doing is worth it." Ryszak elaborates, explaining that every year Ukraine loses wooden churches to accidents. For example, the church of St. Michael in the village of Sumoje was already burned to the ground this year. The reason behind the fire is unknown, whether it was accidental or intentional arson. I quote, "We must continue working," says Ryszak, "because if we stop, we will lose everything not to rockets, but to neglect. I can't tell when the war will end, but I know when I have to finish restoring the church. There are in fact limited choice available to confront the looming possibility of losing religious heritage during the war. Two cases that I discussed today did not mitigate the vulnerability of the churches to relentless threat of destruction. No wooden shield, no traditional means of fortification can adequately protect the building from aerial bombardment. And of course, the act of restoration, while being a vital and necessary move, does not arm a church with anti-air defense system. On the other hand, this limitation underscores the importance of preservation of religious heritage by means of its digitalization. My final example for today concerns the digitalization initiative taking place at the National Reserve Kyiv-Pечерська Lavra, located at the site of the oldest Orthodox monastery in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. The reserve holds a precious collection of religious art that counts over 70,000 items, including icons, books, textiles, metalworks, woodworks, and other media. Irina Martinyuk, the chief curator of the museum, told me that the digitalization of this collection began in 2014, when they officially adopted an electronic catalog as a way to account for the artifacts they held. Yet the work moved slowly, as their funding was limited, and they were using ordinary digital cameras and office scanners for this purpose. The 2022 Russian invasion changed their approach. The enemy was at the gates, and Kyiv's population has fled to the west. The museum workers faced a possibility of collection evacuation or even total destruction in accidental or deliberate strike. In response, they leveraged their personal and professional connection to orchestrate assistance from international partners for the digitalization efforts. Particularly, Anna Yanenko, a scholar in the Department of History and Archaeology, facilitated the partnership with the DT Heritage, an American company that produces specialized digitalization equipment for the art and museum industry. The company supplied the Lavra Reserve with a set of designed for macro photographing under both ranking and direct light, and organized a comprehensive training course for the museum personnel. In contrast to the early phase of digitalization, the collaboration with DT Heritage allowed the museum workers to produce high-quality macro photographs of museum objects with necessary post-production that proved to be extremely beneficial for research and restoration purposes. As Irina Martinyuk informed me, in 10 months from June 2023 to March 2024, they managed to scan approximately 15,000 artworks, which equals almost 25% of their collection. This tempo and quality were unthinkable before the war and showed clear improvement that came as a reaction to stress. Let me be clear, the digitalization of religious heritage in the face of potential destruction will not save it in a literal meaning of the word. As Walter Benjamin reminds us, I quote, "Even the most perfect reproduction of work of art is lacking its unique existence and the place where it happens to be," end quote. Each artwork embodies its time, and there is no way to distill this embodiment into a digital image. An artwork's aura is inherently untransferable. The digitalization process, even in case of 3D scanning, results in the creation of a forgery rather than a transition of the artwork's materiality into a digital realm. Since the digital copies are not equivalent to the originals, a digital repository cannot serve as a Noah Ark for the endangered culture. On the other hand, while it may not save the physical structures themselves, it does open the door to preserving the memory ensuring the destroyed heritage can endure in virtual form. But above that, digitalization is needed to finally properly register the movable religious objects into a centralized database in order to have an ability to evacuate and hide them and subsequently return to their original places where it will be safe. The creation of such a database would become a next step in the anti-fragile response to the challenges of this protracted war. Thank you.
Is this working?
No, probably this one. This one.
Okay, because we need one. Two.
We need two. Okay.
Okay, thank you so. No. We only have one. Okay. So thank you so much, Nazar, for this. I think you are now a role model in time, punctual, inspiring. So everyone else must take his role now. Okay. We have now like 15 to 20 minutes Q&A. And I think we take short questions or remarks. And who's the first one? There is so much to discuss and so much interesting things.
Introduce yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Wageman. I'm the president of the advisory board of FLH. And as we are also in the Cultural Heritage Expert Group of the European Commission, we thank you very much for giving everybody an insight what is really going on in Ukraine. Because in the Cultural Heritage Expert Group, we have been discussing multiple times exactly from the beginning of the war. And I am so grateful that there were many institutes who were immediately starting to give a response. As you already said, what can we do? We can send material. Lucia did a training full of material, but nobody ever could imagine what is really happening on the ground. We had meetings with people sitting in cellars, disconnecting at any moment because there might be a bomb or something. So it is amazing what the public did to safeguard the heritage. And as you indicated, as we saw the figures last time, the heritage which was most destroyed and most under stress is religious heritage at this very moment. And it's of course part of the identity and the soul. So this is done through the ages. You destroy the religious heritage, you destroy the soul of the community and the hope for the future. So really very many thanks. I don't have any question because I'm overwhelmed with everything that I've been showing to give everybody here an insight of that the movement is going forward and your positive approach instead of only looking at what is destroyed but finding solutions to build up already for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment.
I think not. Is this working? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, who else wants to have a remark or a question? I think it's so much to speak about. Okay, there's someone.
Hi, I'm Ruth Ellen Gruber, I'm Director of Jewish Heritage Europe. And I wanted to just make a remark that goes with what Jacek said at the beginning regarding the Jewish Museum here, what Suzanne said in her introduction, and what you said in your excellent presentation. What you're dealing with and what we deal with in most of Jewish heritage preservation is the result of deliberate destruction. It's not the result of dwindling congregations or demographic shifts, as in many of the churches that are abandoned that most people here are dealing with. But it's the effect of deliberate destruction. I was asked recently, is it worth it at a time of rising anti-Semitism and all of this in Europe to continue to restore Jewish heritage, to deal with Jewish heritage? But this is exactly why it's important. As Suzanne said, as you said, it's a demonstration of the resilience of the people in the face of these problems and these issues. And if we don't try as hard as we can and continue to do this work, and to restore these places, then it means sort of giving up. And we cannot give up to outside, to the haters, let's say, or to the destroyers. So I think what you're doing, and I know that in Jewish Heritage Field, they're also working very strongly. They're the same people who have created this exhibition here have been working on educational projects in Ukraine based on Jewish cemeteries where school children are going out and finding things. And there are excellent preservation projects going on. So it is a demonstration of resilience, of determination, and not giving up. And I think this is what you said, demonstrated this all of these with the digital, on-site, and also mentally, and is exactly what I think is needed now.
Thank you. In regard to Jewish heritage, religious heritage, it suffers the damage the same as any other religious heritage in Ukraine. We actually have a very complicated or multi-layered religious landscape, which originally developed as Byzantine Christianity or Orthodox line, but of course the Latin Church was very much present since the Middle Ages here, and then we have Uniat Church of Greek Catholic. Of course, Jewish communities were here since 10th centuries. In Kiev, they are tested in written sources. And right now, there were some calculations on which confessions, religions, heritages suffer the most. And paradoxically, it occurs that the most churches which were destroyed belong to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which actually acts as a Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, subordinated to Moscow. It showed that this destruction they destroy everything. They don't care of the specific affiliation, belonging, and the current map of destruction shows that, of course, the most vulnerable region are those which are close to the front line. And for instance, in Mariupol, there were 3 synagogues, and all were destroyed in the course of the fighting. Also, there are multiple references to the damage of synagogues in Kharkiv, which is very close to the Russian border and shelled constantly. When it comes to the western region of Ukraine, in my city of Lviv, we have only one acting synagogue in the whole city. Luckily, it was not damaged recently, but the problem is that it all constantly reminds of that damage to Jewish heritage that took place during the World War II. Because, the city of Lviv was multicultural all the time, and when I was teaching in the University of Lviv, I was constantly taking students to the city centers, and it's organized around the Ring Square, and there were national quarters, one associated with Latins, with Polish and German population, another with Orthodox Ruthenians or Ukrainians and Greeks. There also was Armenian, and everywhere we have a church which represents this specific confession. But when it comes to the Jewish part, there is no synagogue to show, because it was destroyed during World War II. And looking on this devastation, which happened specifically to Jewish heritage, I hope that this time, during this war, we as humanity will manage to do a better job in preservation of the culture.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and it's very inspiring to listen to you constantly. Just one thought. It all leads us to the same point. It's for centuries and centuries. It's as if it takes a big effort for all of us to learn that we don't have to do these things and we keep on doing it. Like in France, I remember this case, it was like around the 18th century, that when they were going to be invaded by their own, it doesn't matter who, at this point it doesn't matter who. The whole village in Conte, they removed all the artifacts, what it was removable from the abbatiale, they removed it, and it was like hidden in walls and in different places in the families around. When it all ended successfully, all the pieces came back to the temple. All of this. So it all was restored to its initial place, which means that that's why FRH has this humongous task. Normally we take religious heritage. It doesn't matter if it's which religion. Religious heritage, we take it for granted. And then one day it might not be there for whatever reasons, like these awful ones that we are seeing. So our immense task for all of us here reunited is like to keep on guessing and trying to do our best to communicate this to the new generations, because it's never taken for granted. Because when this heritage is gone, all the generations and generations of Europeans all through the continent giving themselves to like stonemasons, artists, even blacksmiths. So it implies knowledge and effort, and they gave themselves for something greater than themselves. Because we all know here that none of them, all of them knew that they wouldn't see the cathedral or the church finished, and it didn't matter. They kept on going, doing their best, because it was for something bigger than themselves. So this is the spirit that we have to keep, and then try to get together how we can fight this this lack of not commitment, because then when we see these images, everything comes clear in our minds. It's not about talking, it's about the proper image. So sometimes one thinks that it needs to go suffering or to the floor or in flames like Notre Dame. We all remember that. It doesn't matter if you have that faith or not, if you are from that country or not, or from that specific region. We all suffer when this is happening. So it's like, I would like this conference, this moment for all of us to come out with 2 lines or 3 lines at the end, like this raising awareness in the citizenship of Europe about not taking it for granted, and this really big task to involve new generations, because I guess that in these images that you were showing to us, there were people several ages. Unfortunately for them, they have to suffer something that they shouldn't, right, the youngsters. But then somehow these people have a message to give to the rest of youngsters in Europe, This is just that.
Yeah, thank you for this comment, and you made a very good point about the entanglement of religious heritage with the landscape in which it's situated, and of course when a church is destroyed in the city, whatever confession of the sacred building is, it's a wound that concerns everyone. And in these events of war, what became very clear to me that because I was educated in 90s, in the 20th century, which was very much about national identity and everything, that in fact, when it comes to heritage preservation and its destruction, you can't separate what this heritage belongs. It's all ours heritage, and we share the pain for every monument that there is there. On the other hand, I would like also to point out that preserving heritage, religious heritage, can't be separated from the general context which is happening. Let me bring an example that in the last year, Russian attacks on Ukraine were focused specifically on energy infrastructure. They bombed plants which produce energy and the links of connections. So for that reason, there were a lot of blackouts which were on a regular basis for 4 or 6 hours a day or even more. And there is a prediction that during the winter it will be even more severe. And these blackouts, if you will consider separately, well, there is no light, so people can wait and then there will be light. But when it comes to, for instance, museum collections that need a specific temperature regime and everything, and signalization, for instance, this is a big problem, because you just can't turn off the heating for 8 hours in winter when it's -10 and then put it on and artworks will not feel it. Of course they will. And for that reason, museums takes a lot of efforts to ensure that they have autonomous supply of energy. But this again, it concerns the using of generators which works on petroleum. And just imagine the amount of pollution which comes from this generation all around the city, because it's not only museums who use it for essential purpose, but also businesses who just need to survive and they use it. So we have a huge ecological impact which is not discussed here. So I think that these events which happen, it actually expose to so many problems that concern religious heritage preservation, that it is not just an issue of culture and identity, but it's also an issue of economy, an issue of ecology. And we need to think in this in complex way, and I think that this will give us an invaluable experience for the future challenges which are coming into the world after this war will end. Thank you.
I think this,
yeah.
okay, one question more.
Adam Klubsam from the Diocese of Gloucester Church of England. Just following up on Lillian's point, at the beginning of the war we've seen some amazing displays of solidarity and support shown to colleagues in Ukraine and to the heritage sector there. What is it that you need now to better safeguard religious heritage in Ukraine?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think that at the immediate threat which was taking place at the beginning, me and probably many people, we were not expecting that the war will last for so long. So I would compare this like a fire burning, when you throw some dry wood into it and you have these flames. But now we need a kind of sustainable approach. We need to rethink it from the perspective not only of what is happening in Ukraine, but what could happen all around the Europe. And we need to think in a long time perspective, but because this conflict which occurred, it probably came as a news for many, but it is not kind of any unexpected thing. It was developing, and we see other challenges that are developing, especially related to climate situation. So I think that helping Ukraine is developing a sustainable solution for the future and network of solidarity between different countries. Probably groups can be organized in each country that will be trained to react to the crisis situation in their neighbors and immediately deployed there. In my opinion, what is most urgent right now in Ukraine is help to mitigate the consequences of the energy crisis. If anything can be done to help to protect monuments during the winter, in case there will be a lack of electricity for long, that should be addressed right now, I would say. I think one of the most efficient programs that is done by the foundation Aleph, which was funded by the Getty Foundation. I experienced this not only from news that I read, but actually traveling around my region into the local museums, because I was doing another research. And when you come into this small town, which has a local museum in unfortunately poorly conditioned for the lack of funding for many years, but suddenly you learn that Aleph supplied them with vital equipment and they rebuilt all their storages in a contemporary way, is indeed impressive. And this help is essential, I think. But I also would say that we need to think more strategically and in longer perspective, not about only this case of Ukraine, but in case of Europe in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Dear participants, organizers of this conference, I'm very pleased to be here with you. It's a new experience for me, and I hope it will lead for more cooperation, because we are all part of European religious heritage, and it's very vibrant and colorful. So I hope that it will lead to great work. So today I will introduce you to Lithuanian Tatar Islamic heritage, and I hope my colleagues will start my presentation, put on the screen. So 10 minutes is a very short time for me. it's more than six centuries of history in these lands. So
Practically impossible.
yeah, it's impossible. So I will focus only on certain part of that history, and we'll talk about the main topics of that heritage. So this work was done by two people with the same family name. So me as Romas Jakubauskas and Professor Adas Jakubauskas, and he is the former president of the Lithuanian Tatars Communities Union. So we work closely together, but he couldn't be with us today here because he is preparing for the elections in Lithuania. So can we, yes, and next one, that's, yes. So we have 4 topics: historical and legal circumstances mostly for the heritage. It's about, we're talking about the mosques, religious organization, founders and builders, and architectural characteristics. But I will try to focus mostly on the main points of this presentation. So historical and legal circumstances. Over centuries, mosques have been the most prominent material manifestation of the presence of Muslims, Tatars in the lands of Lithuania. So we're talking about the lands of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, starting 14th century, which reached from later on from Baltic Sea till the Black Sea, and once it was the biggest country in the Europe by the territory, which is interesting, right? So probably appeared in Lithuania shortly after the settlement of emigrants from the Golden Horde, perhaps at the end of 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century. However, the first sources confirming their existence are from 16th century. Based on this data, we know that in the 16th century there were mosques in Trakai, which was the capital at that time, Vilnius, right now Vilnius, before it was a village of Lukiškės, 40 Tatars, which gives the, explains why it's called like that, okay, 40 Tatars village, and elsewhere. The highest density of Tatar place of worship at that time was in vicinity of Trakai and Vilnius, which means the earliest settlement in territory were at the junction of 14th, 15th centuries. Surprisingly, there were disproportionately fewer mosques in voivodeships of Novogrudak and Minsk, which is now in Belarus, where Tatar settlements mainly dates back to the second half of the 15th century. Attempts to stop the construction of mosques in later centuries, especially during the Counter-Reformation period, are known but their legal basis is still unclear. We cannot find the clear messages why it was stopped at that period of time. The literature on the subject holds the view that the construction of a new mosque required the consent of the monarch and the approval of the local bishop, which was not that easy. The Tatars relied on the issued royal privileges as early as the 17th century. So many Tatars were nobles. It was different in the estates of magnates. There the will of the landowner was decisive importance. Usually he himself contributed to the construction of the house of worship by donating land. Also the financial support of the mullah or imam and building materials. Thus the development of Tatar colonies was encouraged. Restrictions on the construction of mosques were abolished by constitutions in 1768 and 1775. So in this map you see the territory of the Poland before, and you see a lot of mosques in many places that were built in that period. This is a page from the address to King Fuad I, which they asked for help to maintain or build new mosques back then. According to the Turkish historian Ibrahim Peçevi, in the 20s of the 17th century, there were 60 Tatar settlements with mosques or prayer houses in the state of Poland and Lithuania. Only after the division of the Republic of both nations, after the wars at the junction of the 18th and 19th centuries, and the resulting migration of Tatars, the layout of mosques and parishes changed dramatically. New Tatar communities appeared in Kaunas, Novogrudok, Slonim, or in small towns Smilovici, or for example, Osmolava parish. The first wave of construction of new mosques, as well as reconstruction of old mosques, can be seen at the end of 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. Novogrudok, Slonim, Lachovici, Mir. Mosques were built as well rebuilt in 40 Tatars village, Studianka in Vignšnupei. So all that I'm talking about these names, this always in the same territory, which now lays in 3 different countries. So in Lithuania, Belarus, and Poland, we all share the same history. And all this group is called this strange name, Lipka Tatars. I don't know where it comes, but it's a strange name. But till now they call it the Tatars from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So living in 3 different countries and talking different languages as well. The second wave in the 17th of the 19th century, when mosques were built in Ivie, Klets, Kopel, Uzda, and rebuilt in Rajay, Slonim. On the other hand, in the second half of the 18th century, or a little earlier, most of the old Tatar centers and mosques disappeared in the suburbs of Trakai and Vilnius, which were the first points where they settled. When Lithuania was incorporated into Russian Empire, its legislation included the construction of mosques in administrative regulations. They were formulated in the decree of May 31st, year 1829, which among other things obliged the construction of temples according to the model project prepared by the Ministry of the Interior. Before issuing a permit for the construction of a mosque, it was necessary to obtain the approval of the Simferopol Tauria Muftiat. Because in Russian, when it was under Russian Empire, they put Lithuanian or Lithuanian Tatars under Crimean Muftiat. That's why. Nobody knows why. Mosques could only be built in areas with a population of at least 200 male Muslims who had to have sufficient funds to support the mosque and the imam. In 1914, there were 26 mosques, 5 of which were destroyed during the First World War. 17 prayer houses were located in the established Republic of Poland, which contained Vilnius, nowadays capital of Lithuania, and Republic of Lithuania, and 4 in Belarusian SSR. The interwar Polish government actively supported the construction of mosques through general administrative requirements. A similar situation existed in Lithuania. For example, Kaunas Mosque was more than 80% financed by the Lithuanian government. Meanwhile, in Belarus, all mosques were destroyed by the Soviet authorities. The same fate befell most of the mosques that survived the Second World War. 7 mosques were destroyed during the war and ended up in territory of USSR after 1945. After the war, only 2 mosques remained operational, which is in Híjar, one in Belarus, and Rajai, one in Lithuania. After the warming in the 1970s and 1980s, the other 4 were given back to believers in Kaunas, Nemezis, Forty Tatar, Novogrudak, and the 7th remained in ruins. It should be noted that in the Lithuanian SSR, Soviet Republic of Lithuania, only one of the 5 mosques was destroyed, and in the Belarusian SSR after 1945, 6 out of 8 mosques were demolished or turned into ruins. A different fate befell the 2 remaining mosques in Poland, in villages, And a different fate befell the 2 remaining mosques in Poland, Bohoniki and Kruszoniany. They continued to function undisturbed and were protected by the monuments protection authorities, even in Soviet times. In the 1970s and 80s, Tatar communities revived in all 3 countries. Old mosques were rebuilt or new ones were built. In addition to the 4 mosques opened in the Lithuania and Belarus, new mosques were built in Gdansk in 1990 and Smilovice in 1996. Later, prayer houses appeared in Białystok, Warsaw, and Slonim. The projects of mosques in Warsaw, Białystok, Grodno, Sandykołczyzna, and Minsk were also successful. The second point is religious organization in Tatar community through the ages. So in the Tatar community, the mosque was the center around which both religious and communal life gathered. From the 18th, 19th century, it was called a parish, like a Christian parishes, and earlier it was called as Jamia. That is a community of believers. That is the Arabic term. The location of mosques did not always coincide with the network of parishes, as not all Jamiats could build a mosque. The imams, traditionally called mullah or molna in local dialect, as well as their assistants, the muezzins, were elected by the local community. In addition to religious rites, they performed certain administrative functions, such as handling civil status documents and administering court oath. Although the office of imam was elected, it was usually held for life and often passed down from generation to generation. In the 19th century, the imams of more important mosques had the title of khatib, or the preacher. The rank of the mosque was also determined by the name of the mosque until the 19th century, which had a prestigious meaning and did not coincide with the division introduced later by the Russian authorities into cathedral mosques and 5 prayer mosques. Schools were located next to the larger mosques, and in the 20th century, many communities had separate parish houses. The burden of maintaining the mosque and imam's salary fell on the members of the jamia or community. The long-term assets accumulated for this purpose often obtained from bequests formed the parish waqf endowment fund. Yeah, very good. More prominent sponsors or founders of mosques had the title of collator, similar to that of Christian nobles who founded churches. In addition, in some parishes, the position of mosque guardian or guardian called mutawalli existed already from the 17th and 18th century. After 1918, the role was taken over by parish councils. Before the Second World, in the Republic of Lithuania and Poland, mosques and clergy were supported mainly by state subsidies. So they were getting salaries from the state. Currently in Lithuania and neighboring Poland, the state partially covers the cost of the renovation of historic mosques. What I wanted to mention as well, so you can see the interiors. Most of the mosques are wooden. Only the mosque in Kaunas is, if I'm talking about Lithuania, only mosque in Kaunas, which is the newest one, that was built in 1933, in the times of Lithuanian Republic. Only one is from bricks. So these are the mosques that we have in this territory. And one more interesting thing, which is unique, that Tatars, until World War II, they were using, they were writing in Arabic letters, but in local dialects, which is Polish, Belarusian, Russian mix of languages. They were Slavic language written in Arabic letters. And still we can find a lot of manuscripts that are written in that way. Okay, so before the division of the Lithuanian Polish states, parishes were the only autonomous and independent units of the Tatar religious organization. This corresponding to the principles operating in the Islamic world, where there are no structures and hierarchies like in Christian churches. Apart from the symbolic submission to the Istanbul-based Sultan as Caliph, they were not subject to any higher religious authority. It is important that the monarch of Poland and Lithuania took over the competence appointment of the Qadi, the main lawyer or the main judge, only after the division the Russian authorities made the Tatars subordinate to the Tauria, as I mentioned before, Crimean Muftiate in Simferopol. In the Second Polish Republic, the communities were united in an autocephalous Polish Muslim religious union headed by a mufti, and the Supreme Collegium was an advisory body based in Vilnius. The base was in Vilnius because that was back days in part of Poland. It was one of the few cases in Europe where the system and structure of the Muslim religion were regulated by the state legislation. There were 19 parishes in Poland between the wars. After World War II, the position of Mufti was restored in Lithuania and Belarus. And in Lithuania, the position of Mufti was created in 1998. So that is 10 minutes, which is, I was very fast, and it was only half of it. This is inside of the Kaunas Mosque. Myself, Professor Jakubauskas, and we presenting the plate with the Kaunas Mosque picture for the head of Lithuanian Parliament back in 2018, and yeah, so that is the interior of Kaunas Mosque before. So thank you for your attention, and I hope if you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased, can you hear me? Yes. Very pleased and grateful to present today on a topic that not only captures centuries of shared religious heritage, but also speaks to the future.
Yes, for the online...
so I shall use this one?
Yes.
Okay. It speaks to the future. The recovery of the Synagogue of Híjar in Spain is the current work we are developing with the Foundation for Jewish Heritage and the municipality of the town to give it a new use and a new purpose, along with recovering and revitalizing it. Híjar is a small town in Teruel in the inner land of Spain, which had a flourishing Jewish quarter in the 14th century, which led to us a 14th century synagogue, along with the intangible heritage of an early printing house, which produced in the 15th century the early Sephardic incunabula, some of the best in the world. Today, I'll focus on the recovery of the synagogue, which after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain was eventually given to the Franciscan order to establish there a church, a hermitage, devoted to St. Anthony. This has been the use of the place for over 500 years, with some exceptions. For example, during the Spanish Civil War, it was used as a primary school room, for example. But this is the use that it has had. However, it was not properly entertained, and it was progressively failing into oblivion and neglect, only entertained by the neighbors, who eventually painted the walls with plaster to keep it clean, as they say. So it was in 2010, the roof of the synagogue collapsed due to the winter snows, and the walls were about to crack. This led to more than a decade of efforts by local champions, essentially, to protect the site. This work was based on reviving the existing documentation that pointed in the direction that the Church of St. Anthony was in the place of the synagogue, or was eventually the synagogue. A lot of advocacy as well, but it was only an archaeological excavation that confirmed what many of us had long suspected, that there was a synagogue within the church, or even better, that there was a synagogue hosting a church inside, because the results of the archaeological excavation revealed that the synagogue was almost intact, complete, from the floor to the ceiling. These were actually you see here how they would just remove the altarpiece of St. Anthony, and the Arona Kodesh appear. So there are some turning points in the evolution of this site. In 2018, it was recognized as an asset of cultural interest by the government of Aragon, and so shortly after, Híjar joined Moreshet, Jewish Heritage Network. These were turning points for the protection of the site and for its international, let's say, projection, that led that now we are in the position to develop this project, under the guidance of the Foundation for Jewish Heritage and with the collaboration of the municipality. Vital for that has been the fact that the municipality has finally got ownership of the place, so it can be devoted to a new use. Recovering Jewish heritage is not without challenges, especially in places like Híjar, a town deeply rooted in Christian traditions, with very limited connections to its Jewish past. But what makes this site truly unique is precisely this dual identity. First as a synagogue, later a church, built by Muslim masons in the 15th century. So you can imagine that this gives a powerful narrative for today's society. But the most unique element, what makes it really kind of unique, are precisely the Jewish murals that are the only ones preserved to date, as far as we know, in Spain. And then the plan, let's say, is to reshape or recover the synagogue to its medieval shape when it was a Jewish synagogue, of course preserving as well the Christian paintings that you see in the right hand side image that are painting on top. So we have a scene of the Last Supper over the menorah, and the first words that appear in the walls, written in Hebrew characters and featuring the word tzedakah. It's quite powerful that the first understandable word that we have found in the walls means charity, but also justice. No? It's like if the walls are telling us to do justice with this place. It's not without challenges, as I said, because the early attempts to protect or to at least reveal the site were done by local champions in very emotional or sentimental ways, but not necessarily with accuracy. I bring just a very quick example. This was a sign that was put there saying that this was the Synagogue of San Anton. How about that? This site was shocking every single Jewish visitor for over a decade. Fortunately, this sign has been updated now to present a more accurate narrative and one that's more sensitive to Jewish heritage. But there were some resistances about that because they kept saying it's the Synagogue of San Anton because it's both things in one. So we have to manage these little tensions to make the community understand that this is a shared history, but it has to be respectful of both sensitivities. To do that, the project tries to involve not just historians, politicians, and experts, but also the local community, the Jewish community of Spain, for a change, and descendants of Híjar Jewish families, because all these voices need to be heard and balanced. So it's not going to be easy. Our vision to do that in this project is to adopt these challenges first with decolonized narratives. This is very important, that the synagogue history is explained, but that we confront also uncomfortable truths, and not only the, perhaps, if I may, rather romanticized vision of Sephardic culture that's often the case in Spanish, or has been the case in Spanish heritage projects. It also includes the Jewish values and the people. We want it to be a project of memory, like the exhibit that is surrounding us today, so that local population can understand the connections they have with this story that was obliterated for 500 years. And it also has an international dimension. The guidance of the Foundation for Jewish Heritage, or the fact that we are presenting here, is an example of that, which is also challenging in the sense because it's bringing valuable and necessary advice to the project, but might create also tensions with some of the local champions. So it's important that we create this sense of ownership. Finally, the project's vision is to be an opportunity for rural economic development. Híjar is located in what we call España vaciada, the empty Spain, in a very rural, abandoned area of Spain, abandoned from investment, I mean. Which can very well benefit from the development that a huge cultural project like this can bring. Again, it's the only synagogue with medieval paintings. There is not a huge national museum of Jewish history yet. There are plans, but there's nothing yet. So we hope that through our project that will be in 4 pillars, cultural, education, tourism and digitalization, we managed to make this recovery of the Híjar synagogue / church within a synagogue, an example of how heritage can connect past and present, unite different cultures, and support sustainable development. It's pretty ambitious as a challenge, but the synagogue, the community, are worth every effort. Thank you.
Good morning still, everybody. Let me please allow me to say that I'm very happy to be here today with you all in beautiful Krakow. I think the future for religious heritage can make a difference on a European scale, where it concerns our religious heritage as a network, but also as a group that shares the same ambition to maintain this for future generations. Besides that, FRH shares best practices, research and different perspectives on conservation, restoration, sustainability and diversity. Through these, we can only learn from each other, and Pilar said already this morning, but also prepare our heritage for the new era. Today, I'm briefly going to take you through some of the projects that we develop. Maybe next slide. Okay. That we develop and execute at Groningen Kerken, which is our roepnaam. So we are the foundation for the Historic Groningen Churches Foundation, but we call ourselves Groningen Churches because we also have 20th century churches. And I take you through the subject of biodiversity, even though not all examples concern graveyards, because my paper is called Diversity on Graveyards, Tool or Experience. But before I start, I would like to say that it is our project leader, Green Management, Mirjam van der Waard, who's also in the audience, who is dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. Biodiversity on graveyards, tool or experience. First of all, what do we exactly mean by biodiversity? Most of us think of wildflowers that attract wildlife, but biodiversity is more than flowers and bees alone. As you can see here, I show you two examples. Oh no, I have the next one, sorry. As you can see here, I show you two examples of two locations near the churches of Pieterburen in the north of Groningen and Garmerwolde near the city of Groningen. The graveyards around our churches are often archaeological grounds, and sometimes they are even what they say in Dutch, green monuments. Unfortunately, when the status of green monuments was handed out, Groningen was somehow overlooked to a certain extent when it comes to graveyards. And the result is that we only have very few green monuments and lots of archaeological burial places, the latter of which is often an obstacle with regards to historical layers that came after the initial use of the graveyard in the early days. With this I mean that when we would like to restore these later layers, we are bound to restrictions which complicate realizing certain projects. The status of green monument, however, can be very useful for receiving funding for the upkeep of these oases. Back to the slide. Here on the left, you see a picture of Domus Toen in Pieterburen, where you can see the church in the background. That one, yeah. Domus Toen means the garden of the Reverend, which was in the past often situated near the church. Domus Toen is now a botanical garden where you can find rare specimens of stinze plants, which is even a word in English when I looked it up, although it derives from the Frisian name stinze, which was Frisian for manna. This botanical garden near our church is part of a bigger ensemble and is enclosed by a moat. On your right, you see a patch of wildflowers next to the graveyard in Garmerwolde, which also consists of an ensemble. In this case, the ensemble is the church, the tower that houses the school church for educational purposes, and an old and new graveyard, or maybe I should say graveyard and cemetery. I really don't know the difference exactly in English. In this patch, you see that you see flowers that only blossom once a year, and they have to sort of sow themselves out and attract wildlife. Of course, Domus Toen in a way does the same, although its experience is completely different from that in Garmerwolde. And that has also got to do with where they are based, near the Waddenzee or near the city. Can I have the next slide, please? But there are other means to spot biodiversity or attract wildlife. Some of our churches are not only surrounded by flowers and insects, birds and butterflies, but also chickens who sometimes enjoy strolling around the church, meanwhile fertilizing the earth, which is often in itself quite fertile as well. As I already mentioned, our graveyards surround in most cases our churches. They are green oases of silence and peacefulness, and sometimes in the middle of a village, sometimes on the edge of a village, and sometimes almost in the middle of nowhere, as you can see here with the church of Wittewieren in the middle of the province, and that's a quite good example. No matter where these churches can be found, they are attractive hiding places for all types of animal and plant species. Here, trees have a chance to grow old, they provide shelter for birds, and evergreen species such as yew and holly are great overwintering sites for groups of, for example, long-eared owls. Some of these species of bats use tree holes as summer roost and use graveyard for a foraging area. As mentioned before, a range of flowering plants is attractive to insects. All mushrooms struggle in many places because of excessive fertilization, and you can see also here around the farmland. And graveyards produce a wealth of species because the soil is undisturbed. Headstones and graveyard walls are often host rare mosses, lichen and ferns. In other words, our graveyards are full of life. Wittewieren is such a place where animals are left alone and where we leave nature to deal with its seasons. As a result, this graveyard has become almost a biodiverse island surrounded by farmland. And here you can see above how the trees create a secluded space. However, due to climate change, we face some problems with the trees you see here in the picture. A lot of them became ill, and because a ring of trees were all of the same sort, infection rapidly spread to other trees, and we were forced to cut them because they were dangerous and could fall over, because we allowed the public to go there as well. It was one of our first projects where we researched how we could face the future of this graveyard and prevent such a reoccurrence of demolition. So what did we do? We looked into a range of trees that are common for Groningen or the Netherlands and can be found along the graveyards, often near the moat. We wanted a diversity of types of trees to prevent the quick spread of diseases and maintain the outlook of the graveyard as we had known it in the past. In other words, we looked for trees that could withstand or were less susceptible to climate change. Last but not least, we looked for trees that would blossom in order to attract insects and birds to create a good condition where they would flourish. And here you see the graveyard in summer. We don't mow the graveyard only very late in season. And it's a beautiful romantic view. And here you see also the little map of how we interchange these trees. So in the case of Wittewieren, we chose to plant lime tree, elm tree, maple, black alder, bird cherry and hawthorn. And on the right, as I just pointed out, you can see that we mingled the trees in order to create not only a safe interval, but also create an aesthetic image. Due to the fact that this area has an archaeological status, we were not able to plant big trees, as we are only allowed to dig not deeper 30 to 40 centimeters in the earth, and that's from this, so about this big. So the trees are tiny compared to the vast area, and we need to wait for a long time to get back the image I showed you in the drone photo before. Another example of how to bring back biodiversity on graveyards is the project that bears the same name and stretches out over several graveyards around the churches we own. Here you see an example of the grounds that surround the Dutch Reformed Church of Thesinge, situated on a wierde or small mound. Last spring, the project started following the comprehensive inventory of the species that could be found on these sites. The plans for this particular place of Thesinge are special due to its cultural history, which has been incorporated in the plans. The graveyard is located on the site of a former monastery. The current church building is a remnant of a former monastery church, which used to be much larger. Which was, by the way, also the case of Wittewieren, the graveyard I showed you before. Medieval manuscripts of the nuns of Thesinge were the source of inspiration for the planting scheme. The decorations on the borders of the manuscript include red campion, night flowering catchfly, violets, and sticky mouse ear chickweed, an annual from the carnation family. Soon they will be able to grow in the graveyard again. A nice feature for the experience of the place is that by planting bulbs that flower at different times, the contours of the monastery, which disappeared around 1600, will become visible again. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Marsum is another example of how climate change also changes the appearance of the church, and we were talking about this over dinner last night. In the past, the trees were partly seen as an income for the church community or the reverend. The trees were sold as burning wood. And nowadays, to have trees or to not have trees lead to enormous discussions amongst inhabitants of villages where people object to trees because they obstruct the sun shining on their solar panels, or they love the trees because of the wildlife and the shade they create. So we have a lot of discussions, at least Miriam has, with people who live in these villages, but all live in their own bubble, and we have to deal with that because we want to have a biodiverse graveyard. Here in Marsum, may I have the next slide, please? Here in Marsum, trees were ill again, and needed to be taken down on the graveyard, as well as the path leading up to the church. And this is a church that's really standing alone in the landscape again. As in most cases, we collaborate with several foundations, schools, gardeners, etc. And in this case, we work together with students from the Tatar College to replant the trees. And again, you see the plan in which we chose the diversity that was planted. Next slide. This is the last one. So to conclude, I would like to show you an idea of for a graveyard or garden, which we are working on in Spijk, another one of our churches. A few years ago, we restored a church and tower which suffered not only of old age, but also of earthquake damage. After color research, the building was shining again in new colors. Time to look at the surrounding graveyard as well. Research for this site showed that in the 19th century, the church was not only surrounded by moulded field grass, as it is now, it was also a place to stroll around along a meandering path whilst enjoying flower beds. This was, of course, a completely different experience than, for example, the romantic wilderness of Wittewieren. However, they were popular garden designs, in fact, and we found more churchyards that in the past must have had this sort of English landscape garden. In the case of Spijk, we are busy trying to find funds to recreate this type of garden. So, tool or experience? I think both. The aim is to use different methods of establishing biodiversity, not only from the perspective of sustainability, but also in relation to the beauty of nature or our cultivated landscape, as well as our religious heritage. With the term biodiversity, we emphasize the diversity a bit wherever our graveyards demand a tailor-made approach, for which we need different tools. On the other hand, the experience of the place is just as important. As well as all the work we do for our foundation, they need to be in balance. Our graveyards are an integral part of our heritage and church buildings. When talking about Groningen Kerken, you might think we are solely an organization dedicated to preserving historic buildings. However, due to the many graveyards that surround our churches, our foundation is also one of the largest nature managers in the province. Thank you for your attention.